I'm John Kaiser at the Metals Investor Forum in Vancouver, September 9th, 2022. I'm here with Copper Lake Resources, speaking with Don Hoy, VP of Exploration, and Terry MacDonald, CEO. Don and Terry, welcome to Vancouver.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thanks very much.
My first question clearly is one intended for Don. Marshall Lake is located several hundred kilometers northeast of the Sturgeon River Mining District, where multiple VMS deposits were discovered and mined. They're both in the Wabigoon geological domain. What are the similarities and differences between the Marshall Lake area and the Sturgeon River area? And this is sort of a question, what is the potential that something similar on scale and size should exist at Marshall Lake?
Right. In the general sense, the stratigraphy and the geology of both parts of the belts are very, very similar. They're interpreted to be, you certainly they're the same age based on the age data that's been done in both parts of the belt. In terms of the general geology, they're both interpreted to be volcanoes deposited in relatively shallow water, and that's reflected by the predominance of tufaceous or fragmental felsic rocks, which predominate on both properties and are the host rocks for mineralization at Sturgeon Lake and as well as at Marshall with the Billiton deposit. They're both underlain by a very significant heat source at the Sturgeon Lake mines. The large intrusion that is likely the heat engine that drove the mineralization was called the Beetalman Bay Pluton. And at the Marshall Lake property, there are a number of large intrusions that are lower in the stratigraphy, namely the Summit Lake Pluton, which is host to a lot of the copper mineralization that's been encountered. So in the general sense, I think a lot of similarities. I haven't spent a lot of time. In fact, I haven't been to Sturgeon Lake. I've done some research on it. But I think in the general sense, some very good similarities.
Mm-hmm. Now, Marshall Lake, the Billiton deposit was discovered in the late 60s. Majors had it for a while. Juniors have looked at it ever since. Lots of work done. Terry hired Don in early 2021 to do a digital compilation of the whole thing and just tell him, what should we do next? And you concluded that after you put it all together, that if there's anything big and meaningful left to be found, you're probably going to have to go deeper than the 200 to 300 meter depth of past drilling and geophysical surveys. In what way have the geophysics of today changed since what was done in those past decades that opens up this deeper potential of the Marshall Lake?
In the last 30 years, there's been a lot of research, a lot of R&D work done by a number of geophysical contractors and inventors, and that that would pertain to airborne surveys. It would pertain to ground EM surveys as well as IP surveys. And the new technology has resulted just in much greater penetration. So these surveys are seeing much deeper based on different arrays that are used, laying out loops that are larger. They're for EM surveys, they're pumping a lot more current into the ground. And I think the other thing that is really improved over the last 30 years, and particularly in the last 10 years, it applies to all of geophysics, the ground geophysics, as well as the airborne, is that data processing capabilities are much better now, where you can model some of the signatures that you're seeing, both for airborne surveys and ground surveys there. So you can look at your anomalies in 3D now. You can rotate them. You can actually plan drill holes on them now. So I think the data processing and the way the data is handled and presented now has really improved things as well too.
So Copper Lake undertook a deep IP survey in 2021, and you were surprised by what this revealed below 300 meters in the vicinity of the Billiton deposit, which itself had a relatively weak geophysical response. Then you drilled 2 holes into the guts of this target and were surprised again by the lack of an explanation for this. Then you did downhole EM probe surveys, which could only look 100 meters or so and looked interesting. So you did a large loop EM survey over that whole area, and you now have a different perception of what's going on and a program plan to test it. Can you explain what you originally hoped that the deep IP anomaly to be all about and what you now think is really going on below that 300-meter depth?
Yeah. Well, I think the deep, the deep IP survey that we did, combined with the M2 survey, we really just wanted to get some data and some information at the greater depth, say, deeper than 150 meters down to 300, down to 500 meters there. And what the IP survey really did is it gave us a really large area. It outlined it was chargeable. It had a resistivity load to it as well. And so the first two drill holes were actually solely based on that geophysics, where the IP high chargeability overlapped with the low resistivity. So that's what we were targeting. We had no other geological information. So actually we were fortunate that, in two of those three holes, we actually had high-grade mineralization. And but IP, it's more of a regional type survey. It sort of brings you into an area and, gives you target areas there, whereas the EM, whether it be large loop EM or downhole EM, is really going to bring you in closer. So what the IP did is it brought us into this really large area of very good geology, good alteration. We were fortunate to hit those two drills with high-grade mineralization. And you always follow up anytime you're drilling for massive sulfides. I probe as many holes as I can. You really have to do that. And so we did. We probed two of the three holes. And as you mentioned, we also completed a large loop EM survey. And we've just received the preliminary results of the large loop EM survey. We've combined those with the downhole EM anomalies. And what we've defined is what we're calling a conductive center. And that conductive center has very significant dimensions, about 600 meters in the north-south direction and about 300 meters in the east-west direction. We don't know how thick we have no idea what the thickness of it is at this point until we drill it. So that conductive center is related in large part to the IP anomaly. In fact, I think when we talked about the IP anomaly, the chargeability, we were saying it was 800 meters long by 300 meters wide by 300 meters deep. I believe those are the figures we used. So if you superimpose the conductive center on that IP anomaly, it covers a large part of it there. So it's confirming that we knew the IP was showing something. It's disseminated sulfides, probably the strong alteration. Now we have the EM plates there, so we have more discrete targets that we can drill for now.
Yeah, and you've now produced a revised model of what you think is going on. You now believe the Billaton itself is part of the sort of stringer zone that's typically what you call the cone of the VMS ice cream.
Right.
And that where all the ice cream is, it's all been tilted on the side and is deeper, and that's what's causing all this conductivity, not pyrrhotite or something like that. But what's interesting about one of the holes that you drilled this spring was higher than you expected. You got tremendous zinc, copper, silver assays. Right. How does that mineralization relate to what you now think about the sort of the way this system has been tilted?
Yeah, we've been fortunate. We have a lot of data to work with, and when you put it all together and you look at all the evidence, and that evidence is geological evidence, geophysical evidence, as well as geochemical evidence. And when you go back, look at the geology maps. Ontario Geological Survey mapped several times there. Falconbridge did a very good job of mapping there in the 1980s. And in the locale of Billaton, all the strikes of the rocks are north-south, almost invariably there. So, there's the geological evidence right there. The geophysical evidence is, I talked about that conductive cluster that was defined by both the large loop EM and the borehole EM. Those conductors, again, are north-south striking. And they're dipping to the east, again, which conforms to the geological mapping that was completed by the Ontario government and by the private sector. The geochemical evidence is that there's a fair bit of data that was out there, the sort of whole rock and trace element data that we got a hold of, and we processed it and we plotted it up on maps, and we plotted various indices which represent alteration related to massive sulfides. And all those maps show, a very distinct north-south trend that overlies the conductive center as well as the IP anomaly there. So the evidence to me is suggesting that this paleo seafloor is that north-south band that is located immediately to the east of the Billiton deposit. And the Billiton deposit is the cross-cutting feature that we think is the stringer zone. And that's supported by the geochemistry as well, too.
Now, I exaggerated a bit earlier when I said you saw potential only beneath 200, 300 meters. But the Deeds Lake target to the east is actually a near-surface target. How did that manage not to be killed by past explorers?
I think part of the reason is that a lot of the earlier drilling that was done at Marshall Lake was performed on occurrences or showings that were easily accessed, that had trails and skidder roads going to them. The Deeds Island target is located about 6 kilometers to the east of, the Billiton deposit, or our prime target area now. So it's a fair ways away over pretty hostile terrain. It's swampy in places, it's very rocky in places, so it's difficult to get to. The other thing is that the historical work tended to go back to the same areas all the time, to the copper mineralization located to the west of the Billiton zone, and the Billiton zone itself. I mean, it's over 200 drill holes in that area. So I think in large part, people going back and reinventing the wheel over and over and over again, and they just weren't thinking of the potential of, say, stacked massive sulfide horizons or other horizons within the stratigraphic package that were productive. And I think that target came about by paying attention to all the data. And again, we got the zinc data, we plotted that up. So you've got a coincident zinc anomaly that was defined by rock chip sampling. And then we flew, Copper Lake flew the VTEM survey course back in 2006. So we just superimposed all that with the Falconbridge's mapping that defined the alteration, and it just stood out. Now, Falconbridge did drill 3 holes in that locale, but they would be north of the Deeds Island target. And what they were targeting is they had some very, very strong conductors, and it turned out that they intersected iron formation. So sort of a combination of factors, I believe, there. But I think a lot of it is that maybe the appreciation for other productive horizons, or even maybe a repetition by structure. Maybe it's the same horizon that's been thrust over the rocks to the east. We don't really know at this point in time. But again, just putting it all together, paying attention to the details, and it's a target that's very attractive. We'll take a shot at it.
How is the location of Marshall Lake in terms of infrastructure, sensitive habitat, and First Nations, Indigenous people relationships?
The access is pretty reasonable. There's all-weather roads that access, I would say, not major parts of the property, but say about a quarter of the property. We're located about 120 kilometers north of the towns of Beardmore and Geraldton, which are mining supply centers. And we're about 20 kilometers north of the main CN rail line, which runs east-west there. So from the access point of view, you certainly could do worse. It is challenging in parts, as like very, very wet areas, such as our main target at the conductive center. We won't be able to drill till after freeze-up because of those very wet conditions. In terms of sensitive environmental issues, we're not aware of any. And when you go through the exploration permit process with the Government of Ontario, this is when some of these issues might come to light. So we were granted the exploration permit, and there was really no mention of any sensitivities when it came to the environment. As far as Indigenous relations, we're dealing with 2 communities. One of them is AZA. That's a short form for a longer name, and the other community is Arrowland First Nations. And both of them, they're certainly pro-development. They have an understanding of exploration and mining to a degree, and that really came about through the development of the gold mine at Premier and Centerra or the one that Premier found, is Centerra is developing. It's Equinox Gold now, down in Geraldton there. So they've been around exploration. They've seen what a little bit of mining is about. There's some employment possibilities for them. We keep them informed. We put out press releases. We send them out. Terry and I try to meet with them at least on an annual basis, just really to keep them informed. So I think all in all, it's been a pretty good relationship, and we hope to maintain that in the future.
Okay, and now it's going to be Terry's turn to answer some question. You have a minority partner that has not contributed to the last few exploration programs. That has dropped them down below 20%. How does the dilution formula work in case they continue not to contribute to the programs that are going to escalate if I am correct that this is an emerging discovery which will soon blossom into a fully recognized discovery?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty straightforward, just a pro rata dilution calculation. And I think the total expenditure base at the moment is roughly $16 million. So at 80-20, we're a little over 12 million, and they're, a little over 3 million. And, so as we spend, more money, and if they do not contribute, then we'll dilute them. They have indicated that they plan to contribute to this next, or to the current program, which is, I think the current budget is about 1.5 million, so their share is roughly $300,000. And we're actually hoping to meet with management of Rainy Mountain today.
Oh, they committed earlier for those earlier ones too, and then didn't pay. So we'll see about that. But that leads me to my next question. You just told me that your upcoming budget for the next 6 months is $1.5 million. What's your funding strategy?
We've currently, I think our treasury is currently about 1.2 million after closing of the first tranche of the financing. The financing is still open for the second tranche, and we're hoping to raise another, between another 500,000 to $1 million in the final tranche, and that will give us enough funding to complete the program.
So what are the terms of this financing?
The terms, it's a hard non-flow through and flow through. The non-flow through is at 9 cents with a full warrant, and the non-flow through is 9 cents with a full warrant, and the flow through is 10 cents with a half a warrant, and the warrants are all 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Good. And you have a fair number of warrants in existence. Are you going to just let them expire as they are now set, or are you going to extend them?
We have no plans to extend them at the moment. We're hoping that most of I think there's a batch of maybe, guessing 20 million warrants that expire in about next May. Those warrants are at 10 cents, I believe. And hopefully by then we'll all be in the money and they'll get exercised.
And your partner at Marshall Lake is also your minority partner at Norton Lake, where you're not spending any money now. Would it make sense at some point to consider just merging the two companies together so that all this fuss about are you going to pay, not going to pay, gets solved?
Yes, it would, but again, we've sort of got to work out the logistics for that, and that is one of the things that we do talk about with them when we get the chance to meet with them periodically.
Excellent. I've been talking with Don Hoy and Terry MacDonald of Copper Lake Resources. Thank you, Don and Terry.
Thank you, John. Thanks very much.
Thank you, John.